We now come to the story of Balaam and Balak. On their way to the plains of Moab, Israel had to pass through the land of Moab, and that offended Balak. And he hired a Mesopotamian diviner by the name of Balaam in order to curse Israel. Now, it tells the story that on his way there, that the angel of the Lord blocked his way, and he beats his donkey, who was saving him from being slain by the angel of the Lord, who is, by the way, God. And then the donkey is allowed to talk to Balaam, and Balaam and his donkey have this conversation, and eventually it's revealed that the angel of the Lord was threatening to punish Balaam for going to curse Israel, but was allowed to go so long as he says nothing except what the Lord tells him to do. By the way, I have a theory that this story of the donkey is probably a dream, part of the vision that Balaam had, rather than a real talking donkey in real life. But in any case, Balaam comes, and three times Balaam will bless Israel rather than cursing Israel, much to Balak's chagrin. Now, one of the prophecies of Balaam is this chapter 24, verse 17, a prophecy with messianic overtones. A star shall come forth from Jacob, and a scepter shall rise from Israel, and shall crush through the forehead of Moab. The word scepter implies that this personage is a king. And I think the most obvious interpretation of this would be that the scepter and star represent David, who will turn around and conquer Moab as he builds his empire. And of course, through David will come Jesus, so it has messianic overtones, even if it's not directly of Messiah. Although later on, many Jewish interpreters did interpret it of Messiah, and some Christian interpreters still do. But I think it probably refers to King David. Was Balaam a good guy or a bad guy? And the bottom line is that I think he was a bad guy. He was a practitioner of divination, which is condemned by the law in Deuteronomy 18. He was a pagan who worshipped other gods. We actually have an extra biblical text, the Tel Dir Allah text. And in those 8th century BC texts found in the East Jordan Valley, Balaam was honored by pagans long after his death on texts on a plaster wall at the site of Tel Dir Allah, and he is portrayed as a diviner and a seer and a worshiper of various gods. It's true that God spoke through him, but in the story God also speaks through his donkey. So I guess God can speak through almost anybody if he chooses to. In fact, in the story, the donkey is portrayed as smarter and more righteous than Balaam. He tried to curse Israel 3 times, but he doesn't do so because he has moral scruples about it, but because God would not let him. And as a matter of fact, the Israelites end up executing him at the end of his life. The account is here in Numbers chapter 31 and verse 15, where he says, "Have you allowed all the women to live?" He asked them, and they are the ones who followed Balaam's advice, and they were the means of turning the Israelites away from the Lord in what happened at Peor, so that a plague struck the Israelite people. Now, this is referring to an incident that occurs right after the Balaam cycle, where at Baal Peor, the Israelite men came to be seduced by Moabite and Midianite women to commit acts of idolatry and sexual immorality. And as a result, God sent a plague on Israel for their idolatry. And what Moses says in this passage is that this was not by chance, that these women were acting on the advice of Balaam. Apparently Balaam reasoned that, well, I cannot curse Israel unless Yahweh curses Israel. But he advised Balak, well, this is how you can get their God to curse them, by getting them to disobey their God by these acts. And so that's why Balaam ended up being executed. Again, they were seduced by Midianite and Moabite women to commit acts of immorality and idolatry at Baal Peor. In that occasion, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, put a stop to the immorality and quenched God's wrath when a Israelite man and a Midianite princess came and went into their tent to commit immorality. Phinehas came with a spear and skewered both of them with one stroke. You can imagine what was going on, so that was possible. And Phinehas was then rewarded with an eternal priesthood. Again, this immorality was all planned by Balaam to get God to curse Israel. And this is why the New Testament makes Balaam's name synonymous with immorality and idolatry. And so similar acts of sexual immorality and idolatry were being perpetrated in John's day, as described in Revelation 2:14, and those that encouraged this were said to encourage the teaching of Balaam. Hence, Balaam is ultimately a bad guy. The final video will discuss theological themes in the book of Numbers.